And a lot of that communication ends up becoming negotiation and sales, which was an interesting learning curve for me, and not one of those things that's immediately obvious either. Then on reflection, when you start to look at what you do in these roles, that you start to realize actually a lot of it is sales and negotiation.
Tom, you've recently, over the last year, become a technical advisor. I think what I would think of as a non-exec director. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I've started in a few different board advisory roles. So I've kind of been progressing my career naturally, as everyone does. Like working my way up through the ranks, I moved over into the people leadership side of technology. One of the things that was apparent to me is throughout my career, I've kind of jumped from challenge to challenge. So I was considering, like, am I even in the right thing, or should I be doing consulting? And I kind of stumbled into the idea of the portfolio career, which is made up out of lots of different types of roles. One that you've mentioned, which is a non-executive director. Then you've got like board advisors, you have consultants, which obviously everyone's pretty familiar with. Then fractional execs. I'm sure everyone's familiar now with the idea of fractional CTO. Seems to have popped up all over the place recently. But because of my natural desire to jump to problem, like I say, I started looking at consultancy and kind of fast realised, actually, no, it still doesn't quite fit the mould. I was then approached by somebody from a company called Connected. And basically what their entire business is about is helping people step into board advisor or non-executive director positions. There is a little bit of a difference between the two, although people probably often use them quite interchangeably. They're basically the same thing, apart from if you're a non-executive director, you actually have like fiscal and legal responsibility to the company. You're registered on Companies House as a director of the business. As a board advisor, you're an independent consultant. So you would normally, rather than being an employee that's paid, or there's a lot of NEDs are like remunerated through dividends at the end of a financial business year, for example, you run on a contingency or retainer basis. I kind of stumbled into it through Connected. As far as getting into it, my focus at the minute is definitely on the advisory roles. I don't feel like I'm quite ready to start taking on legal responsibility for other people's businesses. But I'm enjoying the challenge of like helping others think about where their business is now and where they want to get it to in the future, and how I can help them do that through the lever of tech.
Cool. So you mentioned fractional, and you do say it appears everywhere, which it does nowadays. As often as I see somebody else becomes a fractional CXO, I see somebody saying, what is fractional? What does a fractional CXO mean? So what are they, and how is that different to what you're doing as a tech advisor to the board?
Yeah. So a fractional executive is very, very similar to what would have previously been called like an interim director. So you'd have like an interim VP. It'd be someone that's there on a contracted basis or on a part-time basis. The big difference between fractional and that model is, rather than you selling time, e.g., I will work with you for 3 days a week, you have me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and somebody else has me Thursday and Friday, you're basing it on outcomes and deliverables. Like, as a fractional exec, I will help you achieve your Series A funding and then hire a permanent CTO. Or if you're a fractional CPO, it'd be the same kind of thing. Like, I'll help you get through your fundraising rounds and then hire a permanent member of staff in that position. So they fill in the gap for an earlier stage company normally that would be held by a C-level exec, be that a CTO, CPO, something like that, but on the basis of they're here to achieve a specific goal. Normally it's focused around funding. It might be around launching a new product. It might be merging a company that's maybe been acquired. Because, well, that's less common. It's still a challenge that might be faced by a larger company that doesn't have a CTO at the moment. Maybe technology reports into the CIO and they want somebody to help lead the merger. It's that type of work. As far as the difference to advisory goes, in an advisory or non-executive director position, you don't have any involvement in the operation. So whereas a fractional exec would be leading the charge, they wouldn't just advise on how to do this, they would actually then go and do it. Somebody in advisory or a non-executive director position would coach and advise an existing executive within the business on how they might approach the challenge, but you have no responsibility for the execution of that. That is entirely held by somebody that is a full-time employee of the business.
So that's interesting, Tom. I've always had a different understanding of fractional and interim. So what you described as coming in for a specific project and get a specific outcome has always been what I've considered interim roles and the kind of interim roles that I've done. And I've never worked with a fractional CTO, never worked as one. My experience with fractional execs has typically been CMOs or CFOs, where the company was growing but didn't have enough budget or didn't have enough work, say, to justify a full-time CFO. So they had a fractional CFO who maybe spent 1 day a week in the business addressing the challenges, and all the work for them was kind of piled up and ready for them to handle on that day. So you talk about a board advisor and you're not involved in it, you're not doing it day to day, you're providing that advice. What does a typical project look like for them as a board advisor? Are you working on specific projects, kind of doing consultancy, or is it ad hoc, somebody picks up advice and kind of almost wants technical therapy, shall I say, for lack of a better phrase?
It can take a lot of different forms. Like a lot of the conversations I've had discussing whether an opportunity was the right one for me or whether I'm the right fit for a particular company and their needs, it can vary wildly. It can be from almost like someone that they want to do technical due diligence, like please come in and advise us on our tech stack and our architecture and look for gaps and opportunities and help push us in the right direction. It can be based on a product. So someone might build an advisory board that's, well, we're building a product for this market and we want people to sit on this board that are highly familiar with that market and can advise us on how we're building our product. The roles that I've done, it's more how they can more intelligently leverage tech to their business strategy. So a lot of it for me is looking at helping them understand even the differences between like different technology areas, obviously like fintech, health tech, marketing tech, etc., and looking at them and going, well, for example, the business I'm working with most recently, I've just started with Good Core, they're a software agency. So what I'm helping them with predominantly at the minute is technical strategy. They want to continue to grow their business. They want to understand, should we niche down? If we're going to pick a niche, should we be focusing on the market? Should we be focusing on the profile? Like, should we be approaching CTOs? Should we be trying to reach out to CEOs, etc.? And it's helping them understand what their strengths are as a business, looking at their background and history, where they've had success, and working with them to help them think about a strategy moving forward and how they can best position themselves and their use of tech to achieve their goal, which at the moment is growth.
Cool. That sounds quite fun. So what's a typical engagement look like for you? Has it been kind of that ad hoc consultancy, or have you been going to the office and working a particular day a week? What's the engagement look like?
No, so it's my engagements with them, or with the various companies that I've been advising so far, have all been on the basis of a number of hours on a retained basis. So I will work for them or on the projects and things that need to be done for up to a given number of hours per month based on the retainer and things that are agreed, depending on size and scale of the project. So for some, that means a handful of hours, most of which they choose to use by having like coaching or physical conversations where we'll just back and forth on strategy, whether they're an hour or 2 hours long, something like that. Or others, it's more a handful of hours are spent on calls talking about the strategy, and the rest of the time might go into research or outreach and talking to others to get the information to bring to those sessions. But that's the model that I've been following at the minute. Although I suspect, like I say, as I step closer to that non-executive director thing, it becomes more about set commitments. Like there will be a guaranteed board meeting potentially that happens on a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, like attending those or attending other key events driven by the company calendar.
So the work you did with Connected, did that focus more on the tech advisory, or did it cover the non-exec elements and the duties that you have as a non-exec director?
Yeah, so the Connected platform comes with its own kind of training program. A lot of what was in that training program is about, at first, being a board advisor. You can kind of pick one of three paths. You can pick fractional, board advisory, or non-executive director. From memory, it might have changed now, but when I did it, you had to start with either the board advisory or the fractional. You couldn't jump straight to the non-executive director. Reason being is obviously, as I mentioned, NEDs have a greater level of fiscal responsibility. They have legal responsibility to the company and governance models and things. So it's kind of normally something you'd do having had the experience of being a C-suite executive or a prolonged experience as a board advisor. The training in it is focused mostly around understanding businesses, sort of like the content you'd find in an MBA. So discussing business models, discussing how you would read financial reports and things from a company, all the different aspects that might go into running a business effectively, so that when it comes to advisory, no matter what your speciality is, you understand how it plays into the business at that level.
Interesting you mention that. I'm always surprised at how many executives I meet that cannot read a set of accounts and are not familiar with so much of that content. It always amazes me. The non-exec director, I would personally, again, maybe this is going back 20 years when I first became a company director, I would have always gone to like the Institute of Directors for any training in that area. That seemed like kind of the place to go for me. Any thoughts on how Connected compares to the IOD?
I don't have experience of the Institute of Directors, so it'd be probably unfair for me to comment. I know Connected's approach is very much focused on the startup market. I expect something like the Institute of Directors is probably a lot more formal and covers a much broader area of business. I've not done the non-exec thing with Connected either, so I don't know potentially how much overlap there'd be between those two. I followed the advisory board path.
Okay, cool. From your experience, now that you've been doing it for a little over a year, I think, and going through the Connected's program, what do you view as the table stakes for anyone that wants to take a similar path?
I think if you're looking at advisory or non-exec type positions, the table stakes is mostly around communication. That is hands down the most critical thing. It's being comfortable translating, especially in a technical capacity, technical conversations into things that will be understood by people that don't have a background in computer science or even in IT. So a lot of things that we may take for granted as just base level knowledge might not be there for these individuals. So having a good ability to translate technical into non-technical through analogies or other things is probably critical. The other aspect I'd say, and it's one that I'm still building on now, is a good understanding of business, because that is the most important factor in that board advisory capacity or in that non-exec capacity, is knowing how to translate the impact of technology into business outcome, understanding return on investment, understanding governance, understanding cost optimizations, being able to definitively say to somebody, this is why you should pick this technical solution or this technical direction over another, because it will translate into either faster growth, more profitable growth, lower margins, reduced cost to hire, something that's more easily identifiable for the company on their balance sheets.
Cool. So what have you found are the real critical change to communication that a lot of technical people, say as they move from engineering management to director of engineering or head of engineering, are missing as they step up to dealing at that exec level and being a board advisor?
Interesting question. I think a lot of new managers, the trap everyone's familiar with is that you're so used to technology and so used to working with other engineers, it's very easy to explain something in what feels like a very basic, easily understandable concept without realizing these people don't have the foggiest about what you're talking about. That's definitely the first hurdle. Otherwise, I'd say the next thing that was kind of a slow realization for me is a lot of it is sales, for want of a better word. A lot of communication is sales oriented still. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it kind of all boils down to a lot of the time negotiation. Right. In any leadership position, you're negotiating both up and down. You've got to negotiate with your team on balancing their needs with the company's needs. You want to make sure that they're motivated and they're engaged and they feel involved, but ultimately you have to achieve what the business is set for you to achieve. Equally, you're then negotiating up as well, like, well, actually, for us to achieve this, I need a new hire, or I need a bigger budget, or we need to do something else. And a lot of that communication ends up becoming negotiation and sales, which was an interesting learning curve for me, and not one of those things that's immediately obvious either. Only on reflection, when you start to look at what you do in these roles, that you start to realize actually a lot of it is sales and negotiation. And the communication styles for that are pretty well established. There's plenty of material and books out there on how to negotiate effectively and how to engage people in sales effectively. It's nothing new. It's just a strange realization when you've come from technical conversations to the business side of things.
It definitely is. One of the most controversial things I've posted on LinkedIn and when I've written about progressing your career is that the most valuable skill you can learn is how to sell. I appreciate we might not all be going to sell real estate or used cars, but you sell your ideas, you sell your vision, you sell, we need to hire these people, or we need to buy this tool, or we need to build this or that functionality first, or we need to address this. And it's all selling.
Yep.
It's
100%.
it's all about that influence, as you say, selling and negotiating. Which brings me to an interesting spin that I see a lot of people saying, I don't like to play politics, don't want to get engaged in politics. And I saw a post actually this morning on LinkedIn saying people become non-execs, board advisors, or consultants or fractional CTOs because they're good operators and they don't want to play politics. They want to move away from it. I disagree with that. I think it's wishful thinking and naive to think that you move away from politics. It's, to my mind, 90% politics and sales at that level. What's been your experience? What's your take on that?
I'd say you're probably right. I think politics is used effectively to mean something negative about politics, but humans are social animals. We have social hierarchy. In any social hierarchy, you get politics. You can look at it at any level. You wouldn't go to a nursery and say this group of toddlers are highly political, but they are. There will be certain groups of them that are kind of leaders of the pack and are the ones that influence what everyone else wants to do. And if kid A wants to play with art, all of a sudden the whole class is following them. It's the same thing. You can't run away from politics. It always exists. The difference, I think, becomes forcing your own agenda by manipulation and other things is what people tend to mean when they say office politics or company politics. It's somebody trying to manipulate a situation in their favour. If everyone's playing by rules, everyone has shared value, it's still political, but everyone's pushing toward the same aim and it's more harmonious. I don't think the idea of politics in itself is bad. It's normally bad actors that give it that representation, I think.
Yeah, that's why I feel it's very naive, as you say. There's politics in any group of people. Yeah, once you've got three people together, politics exists. What matters is not playing and being involved in them. It's how you play. It's do you play with integrity and do you play for the benefit of the group, the organization, other people, or do you play for your benefit at the expense of other people? And that's the difference, and that's what matters. I think that people need to recognize that difference, because if you want to get anything done in a group of people, you have to influence and persuade and sell your ideas, don't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Which also, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche from Dilbert, which I remember from, I think, even the late 90s, where he's talking with the boss about, should we have a pre-meeting to plan for the meeting? brings us back to the idea that when you're doing all those things at this level, you do need to actually have some of those discussions and have some of the meeting kind of before the meeting, so that nothing in the meeting is a surprise. What's been your experience of that, Tom?
I think to some degree you're right. Like sometimes you get what is effectively meetings for the sakes of meetings, where people are discussing what might happen in the future. I think it is needed at points. Like I say, it's very much at this level, especially. You sometimes have to have a conversation in a smaller group to agree what we're going after before you can have that secondary meeting where you have a wider group and you've then got a shared mission. I mean, it'd be impossible for a company to function without a meeting pre-existing another meeting. Like, that's naturally how hierarchy and structure works. At some point, someone sat down and had a conversation and went, "This is what we want to achieve and why." Then they include the next group and the next group. In practice, there's always a pre-meeting to the meeting. It's just whether you consider it a meeting about a meeting or not is the only real differentiation, I think.
Yeah, I've never liked the term, but it's so true that sometimes with these things, you've got to socialise the plan before you have the meeting, so that everyone has had a chance to give a bit of input, think about it, and then when you come into the meeting, it's more the sign-off rather than, oh, this is a surprise and we'll look at it.
Yeah, I think that's what Amazon's famous like 6-pager thing's supposed to be about, isn't it? Like you have to have explained to everyone everything that you might discuss in the meeting. So the meeting is only about making a decision on that information rather than discussing the information, which I kind of get. But equally, let's face it, I very rarely come across anyone whose written communication is so good somebody doesn't misunderstand it or misinterpret it. A lot of the time it's just easier to have a conversation with someone than to write a lot of things back and forth.
So I'm going to pivot completely off that, because right now the hot topic is AI is going to replace software engineers. We're going to come up to this chat interface and we're going to write in natural language exactly what software is going to do, and it will replace software engineers. I disagree for exactly the reason you said. I don't know anyone that can write their requirements down perfectly in English or another natural language and ambiguously without there being questions, without there being uncertainty. So for that reason, I don't think AI will ever replace software engineers. What are your thoughts on that, Tom?
Certainly not anytime soon. Maybe one day, if we ever reach a level of intelligence within AI that it can do what we would do as a human and ask a reasonable follow-up question before it does something, to really dig in and truly understand. But that's going to be a very, very long way off. That level of reasoning is not anytime soon. At the minute, AI, I think, is definitely just an efficiency lever. If you've got well-known things, well-solved problems that you want to solve, it's no different to the good old days of going to Google and searching for a framework or a library that has solved this problem well in the past and implementing it. It's effectively the same thing. It's just maybe a little bit faster to find because it's done the donkey work for you and it can produce that output for you. And when it's baked into your IDE, or even is the IDE itself, when you look at things like Cursor, it makes sense. Like that's where it excels. I need to do a function that applies some very basic principles or something, a very common algorithmic approach. Like I need to bubble sort this thing. Well, you don't need to remember it anymore. You can quickly type it in and it will do it for you. And you know it's going to be pretty accurate. But if you're solving anything interesting, it's going to be novel in some way. Even if it's been solved by another company, like you don't have access to their private code, and presumably the business that you're a part of will want to differentiate itself somehow. So you might be solving the same problem, but you'll solve it differently. And for that, like you say, you need clear requirements and you need to understand what you're solving and why. And at this point in time, AI doesn't know that. It doesn't understand the context. It doesn't understand the why behind what it's solving. It's just very black and white. This is what you told me to do, so that's what I've gone and done.
I think, to be fair to AI as well, asking those good follow-up questions is a real skill that still a lot of us in software engineering haven't fully developed. It's quite a hard thing to really have that domain knowledge, have that context, and to even know what the good questions are. So still a challenge for us as humans to learn, I think.
Yeah, well, it's twofold challenge as well, isn't it? Because it's not just knowing how to ask those questions or knowing the types of questions to ask. They say it's the context, it's the business area. AI probably has a leg up on us in that case, but with any person that joins a company, you need to learn the context, you need to learn the why and the history, and that takes time. Like, AI will only be effective if you can dump all of your company's politics and documentation and everything else into it so it understands that the context of the company that you're solving the problem within, because that is going to influence the acceptable outcome as well.
That's all true. And I would also add to that, far too often we seem to want to keep software engineers insulated from the customers, insulated from that end user, which is very strange when so many companies talk about adopting agile. And the whole premise of agile is we get closer to our customer and we deliver quicker, but we don't seem to do that yet.
No.
So, Tom, how did you decide that now was the right time to make the transition and progress to technical advisor to the board?
I think it was a case of fortunate timing, in all honesty. As with everyone else, a handful of years ago, I went through, and it's happening again now, isn't it? Like the waves of redundancies that happened in tech. And I got hit twice in fairly quick succession and had been out of work for about 6 months before I landed in the role I was in at the time, which was head of engineering for MHR. When I joined MHR, I was then thinking, feeling very rusty, like, again, a whole new set of problems, and realised, again, just on reflection, like, okay, well, starting again, but I've done this to myself several times. This time it wasn't my choice, but I tend to always have restarted quite quickly. I've been a job hopper, should we say. As soon as I've resolved the problem, as soon as I've learned as much as I feel like I can learn, I get itchy for a new challenge and a new problem. So I started questioning, like, should I be doing what I'm doing in tech? Should I be an engineering leader in that way? Or should I actually pivot into consultancy? And not even tech consultancy, just looking really broad picture, just do I start a whole new career path again in an area that's designed for solving a problem, moving on to the next one, across industries, across businesses, across sectors. And whilst I was thinking about that, one of the reps from Connected reached out to me and said, hey, your profile and background is currently the thing that's really popular on our platform for people seeking board advisors. Have you ever looked at a portfolio career before? I was like, no. I had a couple of calls with their rep who kind of walked me through what a portfolio career was, how it works, the types of things that happen. And it kind of naturally fitted that I was like, actually, I can leverage my current career and background here, but pivot slowly into this other path. It was fortunate timing more than anything else. I was just having an existential crisis around whether I was doing the right thing with my life when they reached out.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that honestly. I'm sorry to hear about the redundancies, but as you say, it's happened to a lot of us over the last few years, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole industry has had a number of ups and downs recently.
Indeed. I think it's probably the worst job market I've seen in 30 years of my career, which is quite strange after the severe kind of boom we had during COVID and post-COVID.
I think we're even in, it's an even odder market at the minute as well. Again, coming back to our friend AI, I think he's made our own lives worse here. From like speaking to people that I know that are recruiters, as well as people looking for jobs, as well as people like myself looking to hire, we seem to have entered this weird place where there's a lot of candidates in the market and a lot of jobs on the market, but because there was a shortage and everyone started using AI, there's now the jobs of just having thousands of CVs, which is hard to pass, which makes it hard for people to get the chance at that job. And then equally, you got all the candidates that because of that are going, well, me applying to targeted jobs isn't leading to success anymore. Now it's a numbers game. I have to apply to 1,000 jobs to get 10 interviews, so they send out loads of CVs. We've ended up in this weird death spiral in the job market at the minute where hiring managers are struggling to find good people through the noise. And because of that noise, good people are having no choice but to apply en masse to roles in the hope that they manage to get through.
Yeah, it's a very strange market. I'm seeing probably the best engineer I've ever worked with, is struggling to even get a callback and interest.
Yeah, it's
Very strong
crazy.
CV, great engineer, but again, as you say, the market's just crazy. People are flooded with too many CVs that aren't appropriate. Say people are using AI and whatever tools they can to automatically apply to everything in the hope of getting something. So death spiral is a great term for it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the rebirth of niche recruiters. I'm sure you remember that as well, where you had people like, I
Yeah.
am a Java recruiter in Birmingham. And if you're in Birmingham and you're looking for a Java guy, that's who you go and talk to. And they handpick you 4 or 5 CVs and you don't even advertise the role publicly. I think that's probably going to be the resurgence soon in the way the world works on a cycle.
Yeah. And then the poor recruiter just get hammered with thousands
Yeah.
of CVs.
Yeah.
So in this transition to tech advisory, how did you go about building the skill set that you need for this?
A couple ways. So obviously through the connected platform itself and their training that was on there, and then kind of looking at it holistically myself, like going away and doing my own research around what these roles involve, especially looking at the ultimate goal of non-executive director, and then realizing, it'd be worthwhile me learning more about business. The obvious route there is the MBA. Everyone always, you see it all the time. Like, in order to become an exec, in order to succeed in these things, you must get an MBA.
So why didn't you then?
Yeah, I didn't really like the idea of going back and spending a lot of money on what is effectively a piece of paper. For want of a better word, yes, the degree shows that you've done the research. It shows that you went and you learnt this particular subject. I believe at this level, especially someone that's had a lengthy career, unless you're diving straight into a role in business, the MBA is less important. It's more the knowledge. You can apply the knowledge once you've learned it in your current career, and then you can demonstrate your knowledge of this. You can ask to take on responsibility for budget. You can ask to manage some of these business transformations. All that can go on your CV. But I still wanted to find, well, where can I learn about this stuff? And then you've got the classic approach, which I forget the name of the book now, but it's effectively a book and a blog post that just lists out loads of books you can potentially read that will cover all the same topics you'd find on your traditional MBA. Whilst I was Googling around for a lot of this stuff, I stumbled into the Power MBA, which caught me because it was a particularly interesting approach, which is the same kind of content you would expect in an MBA, served in a very short video format, but rather than being taught by some business professor in his 50s, it was ran as these types of conversations, but with very well-known names, like speaking with people from Netflix, the founder of Waze, lots of other like large companies, and asking them the questions that you would be told to go and ask if you were studying an MBA. Like, what was your business model? How did you identify your niche in the market? How did you control your costs? Like, what were the levers that you as a business pulled to accelerate your growth, etc., etc.? And you learn from their experience, as well as being given the theoretical knowledge and a load of PDFs to read around explaining different concepts. That worked quite well for me. I enjoyed that. It was an easier way to learn and consume. And although I've probably not walked away with as much knowledge as somebody that spent 2 years full time doing an MBA, I've gained enough knowledge and insight to be effective in my role and to bring that to the table to help me gain these advisory roles.
I think that's probably fair. So, full disclosure, I do have an MBA. I did an MBA several years ago. But most executives I've come across, whether they're tech or non-tech, haven't done an MBA. And it's not necessarily, shall I say, to get to that level. Again, I did one after nearly a decade of running my own businesses because I wanted to go and learn more of the theoretical background and study deep on some of the concepts that I'd put into practice for a decade. And I found it really useful for that. And I also found it, I'm a geek. I like researching things. So I ended up managing to drag mine out for the full 6 years that I could as a distance learning student just so I could have access to Athens and all the research for that entire time.
That's a very clever
I
approach
ended
to
up
that.
reading thousands of research papers on everything from computer science to strength and fitness training through access to Athens. And I had a lot of fun doing a lot of research on topics that I was passionate about at the time.
There you go. That's a clever angle I hadn't even considered with this. For me, it was more almost the flip of what you've done. You'd put it into practice and then going to look at the theory. For me, it was a case of, well, if I understand the theory, I can start to put it into practice. So I didn't feel like I needed the full extent of a complete master's of business to do that. I just needed a point in the right direction.
But some of the best bits I thought of a lot of the taught MBA element was the case studies. So it sounds like the power kind of does that with, should we say, more modern case studies. So some of mine looked, which I found fascinating, but some of mine looked at like Starbucks in the 1980s and 1990s. So really interesting case studies and a lot of valuable lessons, but they were sometimes decades old. It sounds like the power are more focused on the tech element and more recent startups and perhaps even current
Yeah,
startups.
they don't just cover tech startups, although that does make a good chunk of it. But yeah, they're all businesses that are pretty well known. Some that are a little bit more obscure, especially when it comes to things that you might not have looked at before. So when it's talking about a hardware startup, like companies that are building physical products or logistics companies and things like that, but they're all recent. They're all companies that are either well known and not established too long ago, or are new starters in an area that have disrupted, should we say, in traditional spaces. So yeah, it was really interesting to see, and obviously you have the advantage. Let's say it's an interview with the founder, with the exec that's there at the time as well, which was really interesting.
So what was the thing that you didn't know that was most interesting when you learnt about it?
Um, I think understanding the financials, understanding how a company looks at cost, and then bringing that into my day-to-day job, it kind of changed my perspective on how and why certain things were asked of me as well. You have that classic thing of, especially as a software engineering leader, you're like, well, we need to solve this problem. Like maybe the best way I can solve this problem is with this technology. We're partnered with AWS, so actually I'm going to go look at DynamoDB. And then you put all this data in and you don't really pay too much attention to the cost or where that cost comes against in a business. And then when somebody comes back and says, no, that's too expensive, you're like, what? But it does exactly what you've asked us to do. It has all these advantages to scale. It has all these advantages to performance. But the business won't, for want of a better way, it's not that they don't care, but they'll look at it and go, but our problem in the immediate present doesn't need to scale to that. You're thinking about problems that we might have when we're 10 times bigger. And when we're 10 times bigger, expenditure, that operational expense, will be a much smaller percentage of our revenue in comparison to what it is now. And you don't naturally understand or do those comparisons unless someone's explained to you how the CFO, several layers above you and several layers to the side of you, is looking at that request and weighing it up. That was definitely interesting. The other thing I found interesting was kind of the business model canvas, and looking at a company holistically and looking at the areas it operates, like how it's trying to capture customers, why it cares about certain things, how those things again play into its cost structure. And it begins to help piece together what previously to me seemed like very strange or odd ambitions for the company. You're looking at it, well, why are we doing that? That seems like a bit of a daft thing to do. Or why are we ignoring this opportunity and focusing entirely on this one? And there'd be questions that seem like very pertinent when you're not involved in that, when you don't look at that bigger business strategy. And then once you have an understanding of that and you ask the right questions, it gives you a much clearer picture of why certain requests are coming. Again, that comes back to our communication thing, and something that even a lot of current execs are bad at is you could have gone to your CTO and said, well, why are we doing that? And you'll get an explanation, but you'd still be left thinking, it doesn't quite seem to make sense, but okay. But again, if you have that knowledge and you ask the questions differently, you get a slightly different answer.
Yeah, I've always found it kind of big eye-opener for a lot of people when they start to be aware that there's a difference between CapEx and OpEx. There's a difference in how those affect you. There's a difference in how you finance them. There's a difference in how they get taxed.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that gets lost on a lot of people are just like, oh, software, huh? We want to use cloud. Not really thinking about that and thinking about all of the implications of it.
Yeah, especially if you're in a startup and you start to realise that for certain activities, the reason companies are so hot on you putting things into Jira or whatever project management tool you're using correctly is that they can get tax relief on certain activity. If it's something considered R&D, they can get tax relief on the cost of you as engineers on that capital expenditure, operational expenditure, through that relief. You can look at, actually, we've got a bit of a tax reduction here because you went and worked on some new interesting technology, and this is how much we pay you. And you have no idea that that's even a thing as a software engineer until someone tells you, or you reach a leadership position where you're being asked to assess it.
Yeah, and that's something that I was always keen as an executive to explain to my team is we are doing this because we're going to get some relief on this. We can get R&D tax credits against this. It matters. It's going to help us save money and be able to expand our runway. But I find a lot of people haven't passed that knowledge down, haven't shared it. So quite often I've even found CTOs that aren't aware of it. They're not really paying enough attention to that. And one of the problems I've seen with a lot of startup CTOs is still thinking that they are a member of the technical team rather than a member of the executive team, having that disconnect. Have you experienced that in the roles that you've been working with?
Definitely in some positions. I think I've definitely distinctly worked with CTOs in the past that probably view that title as chief technologist rather than chief technology officer. They kind of look at it as, I am responsible for all of the architecture. I'm responsible for the guardrails. I'm responsible for decisions on technology choices. And it's all focused on, like you say, the bubble of tech. It's controlling that system and how that system is built rather than controlling or thinking about the outcomes of that system. Like, what bits of technology do we plug in? What bits do we get rid of? How do we make it more efficient? How do we get greater output from the same amount of input? Like, they're looking, it's the classic phrase, and they're working in the box rather than on the box.
Yeah, and as you say, tying all those outcomes back to that negotiating up and down of, what can we do? What can we fit in this? What budget can we get? What allocation can we get for this? Cool. Thanks for sharing all that experience becoming a tech advisor, Tom. Final question from me for this, because we're getting to the end of our time, is you're now working as a tech advisor. You're senior leader in engineering, but you started off, I saw on LinkedIn, as a sound engineer and session musician.
Yeah.
What was that like, and how's the journey from there to where you are now been?
Yeah. It was fun. It was probably naive. I mean, it sounds very grandiose and like it was super impressive. The reality of it was that I did a degree in something called interactive media production, which was basically film and music production that had been squished together. The reason I could kind of pivot into tech eventually is there was a small amount of technology involved in that. So we built things like, my final year project was an interactive horror house. We hid a load of infrared sensors around a room. We pulled apart a Wii remote and hid it in a torch. And then basically made an interactive game, a bit like an escape room. You'd try and enter a code in the pad, and then you'd see back projected visuals in your peripherals or noises behind you to try and spook you and distract you, etc. But it was a combination of film and music. It's basically all about the film and sound. The technology was just how we glued that together. After university, as everyone does, like, right, I want to use this. Like, I've always done music. Music was my thing. I was in a relatively successful band up until we disbanded just before I joined university. So it was very much, this is what I want to do. That's how I'm going to make my money. I didn't go into it with an ambition of, I'm going to be a celeb. I knew it was very unlikely that I would make it in that way. But what I did understand is there is an entire business behind music, and recording of music is one aspect to it, and then session musicianship is another. There are plenty of very successful singers that don't have a band. Like, that's not their thing, but they need somebody to play the instruments for the recordings. So I kind of set out trying to do that. Very, very quickly started to realize, hang on, even chasing down this path, you still have to be lucky as well as half decent, because I didn't have the capital to set up my own studio, which meant I needed to find part-time contract gigs, either where a band wanted to bring me in to the studio they were paying for, or a studio that didn't have somebody full-time and would just pull people in periodically to do the recording for bands. And then again, the session musicianship was very much the same. Like, I wasn't one of the people that managed to luckily worm their way into someone like Sony that has a huge back catalogue of artists that don't have bands. It's much harder to find that work when you're doing it independently, because there aren't many singers that come into a recording studio unless they're a singer-songwriter. And for me, especially, most of those people play the guitar. That's normally the one they walk in with. I can sing and play the guitar. I need a drummer. I need a bassist. That bugger. So eventually decided, well, you know what, I don't want to live with my mum and dad for the rest of my life. I want to be able to go down the pub at the weekend without bankrupting my entire week's wages. So I started looking for something else. I ended up getting a role as a graphic designer for a local lighting company. They had a couple of physical stores. They had a building business on the side, literally doing the electronics and the electrical fitting. And then they were starting to create an e-commerce presence as well. But I joined them doing graphic design, so doing magazines for their shop, doing billboards, adverts in newspapers, and the likes. Eventually, they got me doing graphics for the web. So either banners for web adverts on Google or banners to display on their own website. Piece by piece, I got more and more involved with the digital side of things, which led me to think, oh, web design, that seems interesting. I did that for about 3 months because I hated it. I went and joined a web agency that were basically building either static websites or WordPress templates. Didn't enjoy that at all. I didn't feel like it got to flex my creative muscle. And at this point in time, I wasn't scratching an itch for me as far as problem solving was going. It felt quite monotonous. So I went and joined an IT networking company that were building a digital marketing agency. So they did traditional physical networking. So they'd go to sites and connect up servers at one end of a building to another, or even at theme parks where they'd be connecting roller coasters to other roller coasters and central hubs. It was all the physical networking, but they'd been asked by a number of their clients, hey, can you do as digital stuff? Websites, landing pages, marketing campaigns, etc., etc. So I joined them back doing the design primarily, but then hiring in a team of web designers that were doing effectively the bit of the job that I didn't like, that I discovered when I was trying to do web development for a short period. And then that role continued to expand. Eventually, I was leading a small digital marketing agency, in effect. I had SEOs, copywriters, business development managers, the web development team. And over time, realized again, hang on, I'm not really doing any of the design anymore. I'm now going out to meet potential customers, learning about their problems. The role had become sales. That wasn't what I wanted to be doing either. So again, moved on, and I joined my first SaaS business. This time doing user experience design. So doing the wireframing, meeting with the customers, understanding the problems we're trying to solve for them and for the business, creating the prototypes. UX eventually turned into UX and UI when they wanted it to be more high fidelity. Then eventually they asked, can you start trying to help us write some of the software to do this as well? Because they'd obviously seen that I'd had in the past experience doing some development. That was my introduction to software engineering, I'd say. That's where I kind of realized there's a difference between building a SaaS product and solving more complicated problems and building a website. The software side of things was much more interesting to me. So I then just kind of worked my way up through various software roles, progressing in seniority, taking on different challenges all the time. I had a brief stint where I was kind of doing more DevOps and infrastructure stuff, roles that were more full stack oriented, some that were heavily client focused, some that started to lean more towards software architecture and design and solutions architecture than writing code. And then eventually transitioning into a position in engineering leadership as an engineering manager. And again, through that, I've just progressed through different flavors of leadership role in all sorts of different companies to get to where I am now, which is currently as a director of engineering for a legal tech company called Core Search.
Cool.
Very squiggly career. I've had my fingers in many pies.
I think it's what makes it interesting, isn't it? It gives you that broad perspective on things that can be so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I say, it's one of those things that when I had that crisis and looking back, started to help me realise like I'm definitely a generalist, not a specialist. And even with each of those things, every time I moved, it was because like that learning had stopped and the problem solving itch wasn't being scratched. Things had become monotonous, and I got to realise that each transition was solve a problem, learn something, became monotonous, found a new problem, a new thing to learn, rinse and repeat. That accelerated a lot as a software engineer because you can very quickly get into a rut if you're just doing one thing in one industry. So I churned a lot, should we say, throughout my software career up to where I am. But yeah, learning and problem solving are definitely the things I enjoy.
Yeah, that's why I've always thought that consultancy and moving into that portfolio career was very interesting because you say you're always becoming into different roles with, we have this challenge, we have this new thing we want to do. Pulling in that advisory capacity or pulling in some interim help means you keep going doing the interesting bit, and then the mundane bit gets left for somebody else that comes after you.
That's pretty much what I look at it with as the lens as well. It's like everything, even if it's a similar problem, it's a new company. Like there's always a new business to learn, new people, new culture, new context, even if the problem's the same. And then equally, sometimes it's just all new, which is both daunting but also very exciting when you're running into something head first and everything's new.
Absolutely.
Be fun.
Cool. Where can people find you, Tom? How can they get in touch?
LinkedIn is probably the primary place. Unfortunately, I've not got around to actually building my own website yet, so that's still kind of on my bottom of my to-do list, I should say. So LinkedIn's definitely the place to go, or people can always email me as well. I have no problems with that. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, which I'm sure you will share the link. Email is tom.hill@reyor, which is reyor.co.uk. I've realised that's not as phonetic as I hoped it was. So, just for context on that, reyor is a Latin word meaning to think, which is where it came from, but that's reor. And then a lot of people kept pronouncing that as ria. And I didn't want to be associated with someone's backside. So I tried to make it phonetic. And now I've realised that reyor should have been rayor. So it doesn't really work. But there we go. I've got the domain and I've set everything else up now.
We'll put your LinkedIn and we'll put the domain on the show notes. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today, Tom.
Excellent. Fun chatting to you, John. And I'll speak to you again soon.